morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Sobroff, Decker, and Goldsmith are present. And we have a quorum.
On the consent agenda items, are there any commission comments on any of the items 1 through E? Okay, are there any public comments for consent agenda items 1A through 1E?
We have none, sir.
Okay, we have a motion for approval of consent agenda items. Do a second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, let's go to the regular agenda item. Okay, were there any questions on the, everybody, did we have any commissioner questions on the audit? Pull up and see if I have anything. Do we have any public comments on 2A?
We have none, sir.
We have a motion for approval of 2A. Thank you. Do we have a second? All in favor? All in favor? Aye. Okay. We'll go to the report of the chief now. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, Commissioners. My comments relative to last week of significant events, we had no categorical use of force, and that, as of today on the 29th of January, marks that in the first 4 weeks plus of 2019, we've had no officer-involved shootings. As to community engagement and outreach this last week, had a good, very productive town hall meeting with a number of clergy members, primarily from South Los Angeles, but also other parts of the city. And we spent a couple hours talking about policing here in Los Angeles, as well as issues of racial profiling and concerns for procedural justice and our fair partnerships and communities. It was a good exchange and informative, I think, for all aspects of the engagement, and I was happy to be there and spend that time. We also, this past week, placed a grave marker on a fallen motor officer from 1917, a James Ellsworth, who tragically died in 1917, as he gave pursuit of a suspected shooting victim or shooting suspects. It was on 6th Street near Alvarado, and lost control of his motorcycle and struck a power pole and later died. The striking nature of that was that it was later discovered most recently that his grave marker there was an absence of a grave marker. And my thanks goes to the men and women who researched that matter, as well as the partnership with the Police Memorial Foundation, who found funds to provide for that grave marker. And last Thursday, we dedicated that in tribute to his sacrifice, and that we would never forget that sacrifice as part of the 208 other officers who have sacrificed their life in the service of this community. Yesterday, I sat down with the new sheriff, Alex Villanueva. Sheriff Villanueva and myself had a very productive conversation. First and foremost, I was appreciative of his partnership and his agency's partnership in the recently completed strike involving UTLA and the LA Unified School District. His agency, ours, the CHP, Department of Transportation, Fire Department, worked very seamlessly with LA Unified School District Police, as well as the district and union officials, in safeguarding the lives of the students, as well as teachers and all involved in that strike. And while we're thankful for its resolution and glad that children are back in school, I wanted to take a moment and share with him our appreciation. Agencies here in this region historically have been some of the best in policing in the sense of its partnership, but I think that those successes are built on acknowledging and continuing investing. And that the purpose of our meeting was to talk about just that continued investment with his appointment, his election, and his leadership as he moves forward is how LAPD and Los Angeles Sheriff's Department can ensure that our past successes continue. And then in brief, as we ended the meeting, we began talking about conversations relative to the 2028 Olympics. With the 2020 Olympics in Japan coming up, it is now time for us to begin formulating a public safety consortium, if you will, of all the various partners that will be responsible for ensuring the safety of the 2028 Olympics here in Los Angeles. And I look to his leadership as well as his agency as we join with them. And in the coming months, we'll look to begin looking at Japan and then Paris as to their preparations, so we can learn from their success as well as trials and tribulations that they experience. Moving from significant events, in talking about crime, it is still early in the year. We're coming to the end of the first month. We have seen an overall reduction in crime in all categories, and while the numbers are low, I'm encouraged by the double-digit reduction. It's not so much the double digits as much as it's the trending week over week that we've seen a reduction in shooting violence as well as other property crimes, and including gang-related crimes. In regards to officer-involved shootings, as I said earlier, we've had 0 for the year. Last year at this time, we had 3 officer-involved shootings and 2 non-hits. So this is a good start of the year. As I remarked yesterday in our press conference I joined Mayor Garcetti in talking about the successes and the crime reduction we saw in each category here in Los Angeles. We also saw 11 fewer officer-involved shootings. And when asked about what I attributed that to, I believe that our continued work in de-escalation training and getting officers additional tools and resources, good supervision, providing added training and expectations of supervisors to command and control, as well as the oversight by this commission. And it's in my office in looking at the circumstances of these events and ensuring that the use of deadly force is a matter of last resort, and to safeguard the lives of the public, those individuals that we are confronted by, as well as the officers themselves. And I'm encouraged by last year's, again, double-digit reduction. A third more officer-involved shootings occurred in 17 versus 18. And so we will continue to invoke on the strategies. And I also want to compliment Josh Rubenstein, our Public Information Director, as well as the leadership of Assistant Chief Peters, Deputy Chief Baeza, in the development of a now monthly release of best practices videos built on digital in-car video, body-worn video, and critical instances that come to the department's attention, where we see officers engaged in good policing and solid tactics and in safeguarding the lives of everyone involved. While we have released 25 critical incident videos since the policy was enacted by this commission, the addition of these in-house training tools, I think between the combination of both those, that again our officers are going to have more and more occasions to see themselves at work and to be able to see and understand and model the type of behaviors that have the best outcomes. Last year, we ended with 1.7 million encounters with the public, not counting the countless thousands of encounters between investigators and other members of the organization. Those are just simply uniform officers and their encounters. And while and with the reduction to 33 officer-involved shootings and just over 2,000 reportable uses of force, the vast majority involving little more than complained of injury, I do believe that, and our effort must be, much as we see with traffic safety with a vision 0 for 0 fatalities in the city, that we see a similar vision on the use of deadly force, and that we pursue that with the vigor. With that, as I said yesterday, I'll repeat, this Thursday we've working in partnership with the Police Executive Research Forum, we are hosting a one-day symposium, an invitation to major city chiefs across the country, as well as those in academia and those that are involved in the tradecraft of tools and tactics and strategies in which to lower the to allow officers to resolve situations without having to resort to force, particularly deadly force. And I look forward to that conversation, not for the purposes of encouraging breakthrough thinking and the next generation of what policing looks like as we move forward with the development of those type of tools. It's that type of push, I believe, that will generate innovation, will generate experimentation, and will generate options, the continued development of options for officers to utilize in the field in these crisis encounters. Lastly, moving through on statistics, our traffic statistics, again, very early in the year. However, we've seen a slight, just almost 2% reduction in the total number of traffic collisions. But we have seen an increase in our serious injuries for DUI-related collisions. Our hit and runs, our serious injuries and deaths are tracking lower, as are our motor vehicle versus pedestrians and cyclists. However, again, these are young figures, just an initial month, and I do want to compliment Assistant Chief Grimala and Commander Lewis for a multi-agency task force-led street racing initiative that occurred over the weekend, where their work with the CHP and LA Sheriff's Department were able to thwart the efforts of a very well-organized group of street racing enthusiasts who were attempting to come into the city and take over various locations and streets and do sideshows, as has been commonly known, a very reckless and dangerous tactic that intimidates the community and really puts a number of people at risk. Their enforcement efforts, as well as their intel gathering, were able to interrupt that, where such sideshows did not occur in the city. Enforcement actions did take place relative to vehicle violations. There were also some 30 vehicles that were impounded as a result of their engagement and their efforts to have such disruptive actions. But I compliment their initiative, because what they observed was this group form in Orange County and begin to move their way north. And unfortunately, as they moved north, other cities did not have the resources on hand, did not have the strategy in place at the moment, and suffered the impact of this group's disruptive and dangerous behavior. So again, my compliments as we move forward in traffic safety in Los Angeles. The use of the Street Racing Task Force and our partnerships will continue to focus on this very dangerous conduct and a means to safeguard the lives of everyone in Los Angeles. Regarding our sworn personnel payroll statistics, we remain at 10,072 sworn personnel on payroll. That's a reduction of about 8 individuals from my last report last week through retirements and separations. Civilian personnel payroll number 3,020. Reserve officers are 386, and our cadets number 1,428. However, I'm happy to report that we started a brand new cadet academy this past Saturday. Chief Grimala was there, as well as Commander Woodyard and Captain Ponce, and some more than 300 young men and women began their leadership development experience with that cadet academy. And I'm also encouraged, as they had our outreach efforts with the African American community improved, and we did see an increased number of cadets, but still woefully inadequate in regards to our hopes that we can generate greater interest among young African American men and women to participate in this opportunity. And with that, that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chief, yesterday you mentioned the volume of body-worn video footage. I don't know if it was in hours or in tapes in relation to the year before and the year before. Do you have that?
Well, we have a total of 5.7 million instances now of body-worn and digital in-car video. We collect, if you will, or capture each day 14,000 plus instances on a body-worn or digital in-car video snippet, whether it be a traffic stop, a vehicle, a pedestrian stop, an investigation of a radio call, or frankly, simply taking a report at a front desk.
So almost 6 million. Compare that to a year ago, 2 years ago,
I
and
believe-
how we're dealing with that.
So that number is a cumulative number since the
Okay.
inception of the program. However, what we have initiated in this last year and a half and has become more formal is an auditing or inspection process. I'm happy to and thank the City Council as well as the Mayor in their support of civilian hiring, as I mentioned yesterday, because one of the aspects of capturing these videos is periodically on a randomized basis, as well as during critical instances, just reviewing that information. And initially, when body-worn video and digital in-car video was being utilized, we had to resort, because of the lack of civilian personnel, to having police officers taken from the field to do that function. This past year, we've been able to transition that away from police officers to police auditors, trained and professional civilian staff that can and do monitor on an ongoing basis statistical samples, stratified samples of both captures for compliance with our requirements. In addition to, of course, and whether it be a reportable use of force, a vehicle involved in a pursuit, or any type of complained of activity, the review and also arrest, the review by a supervisor of the associated videos.
So since we're pretty much fully deployed now with the cameras, where do you see that annual number leveling off? At
Well,
4 million a year?
I'm hopeful. We're not quite fully deployed on digital in-car video. We have a request for fiscal year 19 and 20 to add digital in-car video to Metropolitan Division Crime Suppression Resources, as well as to Security Services Division. So I think that those will add yet another series of daily captures, if you will. But I would think that we'll end up tracking somewhere in the area of 14 to 15,000 captures a day, which is quite a bit of storage. But for us, what's critical is that each of them offers an opportunity that should a complainant assert that the officer's conduct was unprofessional or improper, for us to be able to review it and get a better perspective. So far, this past year, for instance, such complaints regarding officer misconduct has allowed us to look and see those opportunities. The vast majority of times, the video has shown that the officer's actions were appropriate and lawful and were not as alleged. So this tool has provided perspective and transparency on both sides. It allows us to see the offenders or the person we've encountered, their conduct and their actions, as well as the reaction of the officer. And in other instances, we've seen where the officer's actions have been improper and allowed us to what would otherwise be a matter that we could not have resolved to sustain the act and to ensure that corrective action was taken and training as appropriate. So I believe the work is, the mechanisms are working. I believe that that it will continue to evolve. One of the things we need to see improved is two aspects of those systems, and one being the ability to ensure that the camera is on during a crisis or immediate event. I've asked for us to continue to ensure that we incorporate the use of those systems in our training, including most recently asking yet again to find a way for our recruit officers to have these devices on them, so as they go about developing their understanding and muscle memory of what happens during a citizen encounter or a reaction in the field, that they recognize that currently the technology requires us to self-activate. I'm also looking forward to the industry to change that, and there's a lot of move afoot right now across. This is not unique to LA. The use of body-worn video and ensuring that it's on when it needs to be on is a phenomenon that occurs across American policing. And I'm encouraged that there are a number of companies that are beginning to develop technologies that will activate that based on pre-established criteria, such as so to that automatic fashion, I think will help us ensure the resilience that the tape is available when needed. Lastly is we've got to work with the way in which we take reports, in which we complete one of our most basic functions is accounting to the court and on behalf of the victim and as well as the accused, the circumstances that took place. And currently that video provides a wealth of information. It doesn't provide the entire story, but it provides a wealth of it. But in doing that, in providing that, the mechanism of transferring that information to a written form is the officer. And that mechanical process is very burdensome and is resulting in officers spending about half their time or more today out of the field. I'm encouraged by your support, as well as the leadership of the Police Foundation and the leadership of Deputy Chief Malinowski and Commander McMahon in modernizing our front office, the way in which we complete one of our basic functions, that is report writing. And I'm looking forward in 19 accomplishing a major step in that modernization. And the desire is, the metrics is to allow officers to cut that administrative time in half, which effectively would increase our time in the field by 50%. That was yesterday another point that we made in asking how this department can grow, is we need to improve our technology. It's not just boots on the ground, as was referenced, or the number of officers. It's how we go about our work and what we identify as work. Those are a couple of comments to your remarks.
Okay. Any other questions of the chief this morning?
Yes, thank you, Chief. I just first want to commend the reduction in officer-involved shootings. I know that's a testament to your leadership and determination, as well as everyone in the department working hard to make uses of force a last resort. Also appreciate your serious attention and concern about the issue that was in the LA Times in terms of disproportionate stops of African Americans, and just want to acknowledge our collective concern about that. And I know that everyone in the department is working hard to protect everyone, and we know that crime is down, and it's good to continue to hear those statistics. And we also know that these strategies do have a negative impact on people. They impact their trust in the police and government, their health and well-being, and recruitment. And I know that we all take all of these impacts very seriously, and I look forward to the report that's coming from the Inspector General very soon, a series of reports actually that are going to look at these issues in the Gang Enforcement Division, Metro, and also in our data-driven policing strategies. And just like you approached every other issue, Chief, in terms of looking for innovation and breakthrough ideas, I know we are all collectively committed to addressing this one as well. And I look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you. And my remarks on the paper, as attributed to me in the paper, I stand by those, and an effort to, I don't want to overly repeat myself on this, but the department, in looking at that report on Sunday, it was in the paper, it was early published on Thursday night, I believe, and we had sat down with the involved reporter and spoke about these numbers some months ago. And so the proportionality of the stop data that was that identified metropolitan crime suppression efforts both in South Los Angeles as well as in other parts of the city, we were aware of the statistics, and as I shared with the reporter, during our conversation, I'll extend to today. I'm well aware of the conversation and the concerns relative to, are those strategies fair? Are they impartial? Do they respect the rights of every individual, both as an individual and as a community? And I can only stress that my concern is that trust is the most important aspect, and that we not lose it. And I'm importantly concerned that we not lose it on the basis of incomplete or imperfect analysis. Proportionality relative to a residence population and looking at policing relative to a resident population has never been a formula within LAPD, and it can't be. Our actions must be in providing for public safety and working in partnership with all of our communities based on the individual conduct of an individual, not of an ethnic group, not of a social economic group. And as we see patterns that impact groups, that we ensure that our strategies and efforts to work with all communities to safeguard lives, that there not be a side effect or an undesired side effect of a community feeling over-policed. I have no intention, and I do not believe this department is anywhere near ever even contemplating going back to a pass where an Operation Hammer or some style of policing that we're going to be this oppressive, occupying force is a style of policing for the 21st century. And while critics may believe otherwise, our commitment is, in holding that trust, is to ensure that our systems, that our accountability, that our oversight, and that our training is on point. And I look forward, as we come to the coming days, to having more discussions about, when we look at this stop data, what other aspects of it should we contemplate, including outcomes.
I'm sure you can appreciate, Chief, that at least the information that's been made available to the public today certainly is concerning, particularly to communities of color, and tends to undermine the trust of the department. I wonder if you can speak a bit more about your proactive steps that you are envisioning taking this year to further instill trust in the communities, particularly communities of color. And I'd ask the IG also if you could just give a broad overview. I know Commissioner Goldsmith alluded to a number of reports that are coming out. I just want to be sure I'm clear of the general scope of that of the reports coming out and your anticipated timeline. It'd be very helpful in analyzing this. First, the IG, if you don't mind, Chief.
Sure, absolutely.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, everyone. This commission had tasked the Office of Inspector General with taking a look at proactive policing. In other words, how are detentions and stops and law enforcement activities going out in the community when officers are not responding to radio calls or service calls, but are deciding to initiate activity on their own. Our office decided to take a look at this in a few different ways, and in particular, we wanted to look at some of the specialized units of the department. We first are looking at the gang enforcement details that operate throughout the city of Los Angeles, and secondarily, we will be looking at the Metro Division, both of whom operate largely on a basis of discretionary stops of individuals. Our examination of the gang enforcement details focuses very specifically on the constitutionality of the actions taken by the officers during these stops. Were the stops legally justified, and were any searches or any other post-stop activity that took place legally justified? And in addition to the simple legal justification, are officers correctly and accurately articulating the reasonable suspicion or probable cause that they had to take certain actions? And if they're not articulating that properly, that is undermining the basis for their actions, the actions that they've taken. So we examined a sampling of stops conducted by GED officers over a 2-month period, looking at everything from body-worn video to digital in-car video to the reports that they created based on the stops, as well as the data that they entered in their automated field data reporting system. The report found some level of issues, low-level issues with the stops and the justification for some of the stops. It found a slightly higher level of concern.
I'm sorry, the commissioners haven't seen this report yet, so I'd appreciate if you not go into what I assume it's in draft, so you know what your findings are going to be. But this is the first that I'm hearing of it. I'm not sure if the department's seen the report, had time to comment. So if you could just explain the general nature of the reports you're doing and the timeline. So this report on the Gang Enforcement Division, when is that coming out approximately?
So that report will be scheduled to be presented to the Commission next week.
Next week.
And I mentioned some of the findings just to say that the areas that we looked at were, we had some issues which we will discuss in greater detail. In addition, we also looked at issues of procedural justice generally, as well as the operation of the body-worn video, as the Chief alluded to in his report, and digital in-car video.
Okay, and then the Metro report, what is that?
The Metro report will be a very similar, we're considering the second part of this look at proactive policing. And so we'll look at similar issues, again, constitutionality of the stops that are being conducted, and constitutionality of the post-stop activities, such as searches of individuals, of vehicles, of articles, and so on. We don't have a timeline set for that yet, but it'll be in the latter half of this year.
Okay. But next week you think we'll get the first report?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that and the broad overview of what you've been looking at. And Chief, if you could turn, I know that you're taking a lot of efforts to do outreach. The department's undergone implicit bias training, but I think it'd be helpful, particularly in light of all these reports, just
Sure.
to have a better understanding of your vision here.
Okay, so briefly, in my vision is what we've set out is a continuation of some of the work we've done in the past and the deepening in strategies. One is, in regards to community, it's building trust. Building trust in each of our communities and understanding how trust is built and deepened and how trust is lost or weakened. In regards to internally, is building trust and confidence in the organization, by the organization, that its engagement in the field is worthwhile, that it's respected, that it's meaningful, and that our officers and our personnel are going to be treated fairly as well. And that consortium together is what allows for the best partnerships and the shared responsibility of how the department can best work with each of our communities and members of our communities in a productive way. And that engagement, let's talk about building trust and deepening trust. That engagement has been with my appointment and before, is looking at the organization as to what is every member's involvement in building trust. For instance, when the Metropolitan Division the expansion of it was established, there was both a realization that those officers themselves needed to have community engagement beyond crime suppression. And so programmatically, it was assigned and tasked and monitored that their engagement in communities would not just be solely a crime suppression. Secondly, is that training relative to those officers, whether they met the requirements to meet and be a member of the Metropolitan Division, included implicit bias and what that meant, and also a self-awareness that these are officers and individuals that are aware that all of us have biases, all of us have preconceived notions, all of us can take shortcuts, if you will, that can have negative consequences and can leave the other individual at the other end of the conversation with a belief that they're not going to be treated fairly or justly. So strategies to combat that is, first is the awareness, secondly is the social contact, is increasing those engagements, and that's why Metropolitan Division, as an example, and this was asked and will continue to be engaged in those social contacts and in those community engagements, and not just an enforcement posture. But that social engagement, social interactions has now also extended to well beyond our senior leads and our area stations, to include our involvement with youth programs, to include the establishment of the community safety partnerships and the expansion of those last year and a half ago with Harvard Park. This year, South Park will open in Newton Division in South Los Angeles as the latest edition, and later this year we'll add in the foothill area of San Fernando Valley, the Pacoima area, a community safety partnership made up of approximately 10 officers in neighborhoods that are highly impacted by violence, not as a suppression from a standard traditional manner of a presence and identifying those responsible, but from a presence of building trust with those that are being victimized and those that are being preyed upon by others in that community, to form and improve bonds of trust and reliability that we can work with them and work intelligently with other stakeholders to understand how to improve the conditions of those neighborhoods so that this circumstance of violence doesn't continue. And moving beyond that, it's that outreach and engagement is important, but also demonstrating that outreach and engagement through other strategies. So not just CSP, not just youth programs, but looking at, for instance, pre-arrest diversion of young people and understanding what is the role that we can do to promote that and move beyond it. Accountability and transparency is also, and I'll finish with that in the interest of time. Accountability and transparency in the sense of the issuance of body-worn and digital car video as tools to better have transparency into what is occurring is important. But if there's not accountability in the sense of systematically and regularly reviewing that information and taking action when we find shortfalls, and also congratulating those when we see strengths, then I think that's where we lose traction in demonstrating a genuineness of our desire to have and hold the trust of each community.
Thank you, Chief. I think it was either last week or the week before, the commission approved conducting a community survey. Will you be using that as a vehicle to get feedback and ideas from the community as well on
Ye-
this area?
Yes, and as promised, before we invoke, as a reminder for the public, the department submitted its supplemental police account budget that is now going before, that you approved, that's going before the council and the mayor for approval, that has an earmark to set us to do a formal community survey that's multimodal. That is, and its design is going to come back before this commission before we embark on it. And that survey and its nature of asking through various channels assessment of trust and what is impacting that and what strengths and also weaknesses we have is something that will be in a more formal manner for us. What I look to do is do that at least, on an annual basis is still too infrequent, but we have to do it much more than we're doing it today. And that is going to be part of our strategy in 2019.
To change topics slightly, but referring to your report and the stats that were issued yesterday, and I know you've spoken about this before, but seeing the numbers, it's obviously very striking that the calls for service in the last year went up approximately 160,000. Is that
56,000 from last year, 170,000 from 2012.
got it? Okay.
The increase is, in regards to this last year, the increase, about half of it maps back to the manner in which we handle burglary investigations. Historically, there was a number of calls that would be dispatched for efficiency to a watch commander's desk that years before would go to a watch commander's desk rather than communication issuing it as a call for service. The challenge we saw that in the last couple of years is we had community complaints that their call got dropped and they never saw a police officer. And when we look back, we saw that it went from an electronic computer system to a paper system, and out of concern that there was some truth to that, we changed that mechanism. But going back to, but that does not account for the entire increase. In fact, when you go back to 2012, you see the increase of 170,000 in total. When we looked at that, it is disturbances. It is also welfare checks, meaning that we're asking about the welfare. We're getting calls from service from community members asking about the welfare of a loved one. Also, radio calls involving individuals suffering apparently from mental illness, and calls to help render aid and assistance and bring resources to them. We are looking very closely at the makeup of what that increase is. And I'm encouraged that, for instance, one of the initiatives that we have ongoing under the leadership of Commissioner Goldsmith is finding alternatives, for instance, on the mental health calls, that we would not be the primary agency, that we would allow and have agencies other than LAPD and fire be the first in, and so that they could triage those calls, because many of them are simply a need for resources and support for people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. So we'll continue to drill through that increased workload. It is also my intention, as I announced yesterday, for us to continue to look to modernize the way in which some of those calls can have alternatives. For instance, we added theft investigations as an online report capability, not requiring this past July, so that officers would not be required, or community members, to have to wait for a report to be taken at a desk or in the field. That can take a couple hours to get accomplished. I'm happy to see that the public has adopted that alternative strategy with open arms, and we now are taking hundreds of reports that used to take officers hundreds of hours in order to complete. This next month, I look to add to that suite to include potentially traffic collisions where a hit and run where there's no investigative follow-up that numbers some 20,000 here in Los Angeles, and I see the city attorney looking my way. So we will go down these avenues in an effort to lessen the workload, so that we can increase the amount of time officers have for the important matters of community interaction and engagement.
Do we have public comments on the chief's report?
Yes, sir. We have 8 cards.
Okay.
The first 3, the Red Chief, Hamid Khan, and Adam Smith.
Red Chief, please. Morning, sir. Try it again.
Testing 1, 2. Thank you. Red Chief Hunt on the record. I want to say this. Although the numbers are down, the management still is not that good here. I think that the management need to work with the people. The Constitution says we the people, not just individuals and things like that. I'm really concerned about the management, how they treat people, and where it's going from here. The manuals and the training manuals haven't been updated. I don't know. You take a 30-year-old guy and ask him to do a manual. I haven't seen that proof yet out of the 6 months that Michael Moore's been in office. Training is very important. I think it should be updated every 90 days, and how to train the police officers are working with the public. The public needs to have access to all events, or somebody from the public needs to go and survey all events that happens behind LAPD scenes and things like that. Just keep you guys accountability. We've come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go from 92 to now. And when we was first back on the federal consent decree after the King beating and things like that, we have improved a lot since then, but we still got a long ways to go, guys. I mean, policing now should be everybody. It's a group thing. It's not an individual or somebody with a uniform, because that kind of policing is outdated. Everybody needs to take the responsibility and be accountable for their actions, and we need to start training, getting those manuals trained, and the people who are up at the top trained like that too. So I mean, the manuals are still outdated, and that's what we really need to work on, the way we police the city of Los Angeles.
Thank you, sir.
And the Constitution say we the people. I've been arrested 86 times. We the people.
Hamid Khan, please. Followed by Adam Smith and Paula Miner.
The spin was on so much and the propaganda machine was on so much that if you wanted to, I think we need to watch the video and pull it up from public television to see exactly what Michael Moore was talking about. You know, and this is your classic George Bush's school of lies. And if you say it enough times, and if you completely reject and neglect everything else, you know, which you already know. I mean, Michael Moore, not for a second, he was there on July 24th when we made that the presentation at the public hearing on data-driven policing, that he was there looking at the record. Shane Goldsmith was there. Mark Smith was there. We were showing the disproportionate impact on the black community. 5 times stop data, 6 times arrest data, 3 times parole data, on and on and on, and looking at gang junctions. So that was one thing that all of a sudden now LA Times talks about it, so they're giving it lip service. And then we need to bring in Garcetti into this conversation as well, who's now calling for an audit. Whereas Garcetti's own history in 2015, he talks about expansion of Metro, right? And as he's talking about expansion of Metro, Beck is talking about that Metro officers have to be trained in predictive policing. This is 2016. Then Laser becomes fully operational, and then Metro officers are being trained in Laser. But Metro officers are already coming from broken windows policing as well. I think it's really, really important for us to understand and look at the mechanics, look at the infrastructure, look at the institution, and look at the tools of what we are talking about. Eileen Decker was the deputy mayor of Garcetti when we met with her staff in late 2014, Thalia Polychrenis and Neeraj Bhatnagar, and we laid out the whole infrastructure of the architectural surveillance. Here's Eileen Decker sitting on the commission. 0, nothing. So what you're seeing is this smoke and mirror. So I think the only one leg of the stool, that is just a little bit of expectation to see what Mark Smith comes back with. Because the 2 other legs of the stool are rotten to the core.
Next speaker, please. Thank you, sir.
Good morning.
Mr. Smith.
A few things. Chief, you brought up the watching 2020 Olympics in Tokyo as a, model for what you all can hope to accomplish with the Olympics in 2028. And I wonder, for a city that talks so much about immigration and dealing with immigrants and being a safe place. Obviously, our coward boy mayor won't actually say sanctuary city because he doesn't know what it means, but the truth is about Olympic security is that you will be working with DHS. You'll be bringing ICE into our city, into the communities most impacted by these policies. So I thought that was worth naming. I thought it was also worth naming how you are patting yourself on the back for the community outreach that you keep talking about to the black community. And yet I feel like the black community that is disparately impacted by your LAPD, representatives of that community show up here every week, and I don't think Dignity and Power Now or Black Lives Matter LA or the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, any of these groups that represent voices from the communities that you're talking about reaching out to were invited to that meeting. So it's pretty shameful that you're bringing that up here like it's some win for the department. When you were talking about the 20 seconds. Inspector General, you're talking about these audits as a mechanism to hold officers to a higher standard. Are the audits going to be skewed when in-car videos are dismantled like they were in 2015 when Soboroff hid it from us, or when Eric Rivera's murderers turned?
Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Paula Miner, followed by Gina Viola and Melina Abdullah.
Morning.
Good morning. I too want to talk about the LA Times article, but first I just want to comment on Chief Moore and Soboroff's patting each other on the back over the body cameras. As we all are aware, 2 of those highly elite pieces of equipment failed October 29th when Albert Ramon Dorsey was murdered in the 24-hour fitness on Sunset. As stated in your film by your spokesperson, Josh Rubenstein, one fell off and one didn't function. So what happened with that footage is everything leads up to the murder, but the murder was not covered. So I know we need to be careful talking about how great these body cameras work. Secondly, the article in the LA Times I think is significant because the LA Times has traditionally been your ally. So when your ally discloses some of the truth that's going on in LAPD, I think is important. They said that those metro divisions were created to swarm crime hotspots. That's the word that's been talked about in this commission for years, hotspots. And of course, we know these hotspots are determined by invalid algorithms. Many research groups talk about how invalid those algorithms are when applied to African Americans and especially to African American women. So when we talk about using those methods of surveillance to develop the system, it is originally flawed and it's sad. The other thing is, in the report, it said Metro officers stop African-American drivers at a rate more than 5 times their share of the city population. This is extremely significant and is extremely sad. Chief Moore says that officers are trained to recognize their own implicit racial bias, but not what to do about it.
Morning.
Morning.
So you talk about 11 fewer officer-involved shootings from 2017 to 2018, and you cite training as one of the reasons and oversight of this commission. This commission didn't find any of those killings out of policy. So how is this commission at all to be attributed to that? Additionally, training, I would like Albert Ramon Dorsey's family or Valerie Rivera, Eric Rivera's mother, to weigh in on that about training and how they feel your officers have been trained. I don't see either of those as being a reason for the reduction. What I do see, we haven't had an officer-involved shooting this year, and the thing that's different about this year from last year is 1421 passed. So now we have access to those records. So I think what's happening is you're getting more accountability from the voters from this pressure. It's not from this oversight. No way. I am following up again on my offer to help you supply the data for those records, 1421. You've taken my name and number twice now in these meetings, 2 weeks in a row. I've yet to be contacted about that. I still have staff that's ready and able to help you pull those records, since you said that's the hindrance to be able to do so. However, I did just hear you talk at length about the civilians you've hired to watch body-worn video. So I'm wondering if you're training those civilians for that, it seems those civilians could also be utilized to pull records for 1421. So I think you do have ample staff to honor those requests for those records. And I think the whole idea about limiting those for past acts is because you know what's in those records and you have things to hide. So thank goodness for 1421, and thank goodness 2019 hasn't seen an officer-involved shooting as a result of it.
The next speaker, Melina Abdullah, followed by Reverend and Valerie Rivera.
So I want to speak, before I speak to the report, I want to speak to your meeting in South Los Angeles and let you know that we see what you're doing, that you're attempting to manipulate things by engaging with what you all consider to be the good Negroes. Right? Those who are most active around questions of police accountability have been excluded from such meetings. We've not been invited. We're South LA residents. We have South LA organizations. But instead, you think that you can go around us by meeting with what you think are the good Negroes. We know some of those good Negroes. We know that they're just as upset as we are about the murder of Albert Ramon Dorsey. We know that they're not buying your PR stump around the idea that 2 body-worn cameras could fall off before your officers murder Albert Ramon Dorsey while he was naked in the locker room. We also know that they're just as upset as we are about the over-policing of black people by what your paid consultant calls stop and frisk in a car. So what we want to know is, what is your solution to the audit that black people have been knowing the answer to for generations, right? We know about driving while black. The answer cannot be what I'm hearing you utter now, that stop and frisk in a car will be expanded to stop and frisk on the sidewalk, stop and frisk on a playground, stop and frisk at schools, stop and frisk in communities, stop and frisk in churches. We know that the answer to protecting the dignity and humanity of black folks is rolling back police engagement. Consult any UC Berkeley study, the Harvard study, the Stanford study. We want fewer police in our communities and more money for community resources. We know that what you're proposing will only lead to greater brutality, greater death, and you talk about trust. We can't trust you when you kill and abuse us. It will be
Next speaker, please. You want to call the next speaker, please?
The next speaker, Reverend, followed by Valerie Rivera.
First of all, I think it's really important to understand that Melina Abdullah is an academic juggernaut. Hamid Khan and others are community organizers in LA, LA Can, Pete White, organizing juggernauts. That means they have the conversations, they write the reports, they expose the obvious dysfunction that's going on. This is not a question about what the report says. This is a question about power and how people like you cover shit up. You're talking to a United States Army veteran who served in the military, who knows how top-down politics work. And I've seen generals and sergeant majors cover up rapes that happen inside of the military. I've seen top officials cover up those individuals who've been most vulnerable in the military just because they get a pension and go home at the end of the day. That's right, Michael Moore. You have 2 pensions coming your way. So don't try to convince the community you have a trust and you want to build hope in the community. You're going home with 2 pensions while black folks are dying on these streets. You sit up here and lie to folks and treat people like shit The black community, we are not well today. We are being attacked and targeted while people like him go home with sometimes in the millions, pension plans. This is about power, how people like Soboroff help to cover shit up. And yes, there are black folks dying. But as somebody who served in the military and watched like people like you cover up death like this, it's fucking disgusting. And I hope Albert Ramon Dorsey visits all of y'all after tonight.
Next speaker, please.
Valerie Rivera.
Valerie Rivera. Next speaker. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Ooh, thank you for getting me fired up because I'm fired up. For everybody that doesn't know me, my name is Valerie Rivera, and I am the mother of Eric Rivera, who was shot 7 times and ran down by an out-of-control police car because they failed to put it in park. And this department, Chief Moore, all these people up here have been nothing but disrespectful, have never once reached out to me. Talk about, you know how hard and difficult it is? You know how much my stomach turns every time I hear you all up here trying to give you guys a pat on the back and a pat on the back and a round of applause for this department? The only time I will ever applaud this department is when there is no more killings being done. The only time I will ever applaud this department is when you smiling, huh? It's really nice, huh? It's real. How comforting for me as a grieving mother to have you all up there smiling. How nice. Prime example of the disrespect. Wow. Prime example. Ooh. I have so much to say. I've been gone for 2.5 months because I didn't want to deal with y'all. I had better things to do for my time, and that was celebrating Christmas with my children, grieving my son Eric for not being there with us, celebrating Thanksgiving and having an open chair because he's not there with us, bringing in the new year without my baby, and still having to be in this fucked up struggle with this department to get justice for my baby or some changes. Let's talk about change. How about training your officers to never jump out of a car and not put it in park? How about that change?
Would you like to do your public comment now?
Yeah, but you know what? I think it's going to be more than 2 minutes if you will allow that just for a quick minute.
Your public comment. Go ahead.
Let's talk about that training. Huh? It's common sense. We get trained this when we learn to drive and get our driver's license at 16. It's common sense that when you're driving and you get out of your vehicle, you make sure 100% that fucking car is in park. And that's not the only thing. This department is allowing a person, which is the passenger, it wasn't even the one driving, is allowing this person to be a field training officer. And in his previous years of being an officer, has also had an incident of a runaway vehicle, but has failed to tell his people that he is training. Right off the bat, you would think, hey, you know what? I had an incident before, back years ago, and I've learned from this. And since I'm a field training officer, I think it's very important to let you know right off the bat, if you ever get out of your vehicle, make sure that vehicle is in park. Because I fucked up one time. I learned from that mistake. So I'm giving you that advice down to you because I'm training you. And I should be responsible for that. Let's talk about this type of stuff. I tried reaching out to you, Chief Moore. You sit here and you talk all the time about how much you want to build trust, how much you want to build communication, how much you want to sit there and fucking, be around people. The only people you want to be around is the people that are positive for you, the people that are over here applauding you. You never want to be around us. You never want, it would probably turn your stomach to stand here and talk to me for 1 minute. I have concerns. This isn't just about my baby being killed. I have concerns about the community. I have concerns about these negligent, incompetent officers. And it's not just one officer, it's both of them. How can that officer go and jump back in the car and supposedly try to step on the brake, but steps on the gas? These people are obviously unable to sit there and comprehend even a split second. Those are people I do not want protecting these streets. I'm good. I know. Let me talk. I'm good. I need to talk because it's been 2.5 months, and you know what? For the last couple of weeks, I have gone through it. I have had to deal with my depositions. I had to deal with sitting there in front of these cops that killed my son. I had to deal with this bullshit ass mediation. You want to sit here and talk about money? Let's talk. Can you all believe that these bastards had the nerve to try to settle with me for $50,000? $50,000. You guys are better out telling me, you know what, I don't think you deserve anything. It's going to be zero. We ain't going to give you nothing. I would have been more happier with just that because either way, I'm going to fight with everything I got. It doesn't matter. That money does not matter. I'm happy as far as me losing my baby. The only pain that I have in my heart. At least I'm blessed to still be happy and humble. And to still be able to love. Because God's with me. And He's all I needed in the community. And you guys sit here and you of all people, all this money you just got. This department is telling me that they didn't even have $1 million that day to offer. What kind of crock of shit is that? And like I said, it's not about the money. I'd much rather have my baby back. But the truth is, the only way to get to you bastards is by putting a big dent in your pocket. That's right. That is the only way. And even that is semi-justice for my baby. Because honestly, the only way I will feel 100% comfortable with my baby's justice is the 2 badges of those bullshit ass cops that you got. The badge of you and the resignment or the firing of Jackie Lacey. And believe me, if we don't win this trial, we're going to win the next. Believe that. That's right. Believe that. And it ain't going to be done with that because I'm coming after every single one of you that have been involved in this whole case. Every single one of you. You all should be so disgusted with yourselves. All I asked was a meeting just to talk to you about my concerns. I didn't even dislike you, Chief Moore. I do now. You taking that trust away from a civilian right now. You understand that? You took that trust away from a person right now. You know, it hurts so bad. You guys don't have any idea. Have you guys ever put yourselves in my shoes for even a moment? Trust me, it's difficult to even do it for a moment. 24/7, I think about Eric. Eric is on my mind 24/7. This department is on my mind 24/7. Even when I'm trying to live my life to be happy for my baby, because I know that's all he wants for me, is to be happy. He's always on the side of my mind, just constantly. And let me tell you guys something. Eric's spirit is stronger than any of you all. Eric's spirit is stronger than this bullshit-ass department. He is very much alive. Believe that. Believe that. And that's the only thing that keeps me going. Can you imagine the families that suffer more than me? Can you imagine the families that can't come here and speak their mind to the departments that killed their loved one and open that? And let me tell you something. This is part of my grievance, my grieving part. This allows me to continue to grieve the way it's healthy, because you all deserve to hear me in my pain, because you guys are giving this pain. So you know what? I suggest to you all, find God. Find God. Open yourselves up to God. He'll speak to you. You know, and hopefully you'll change to be a better person. I'm done. Until next time, I'm done.
I have no other cards on this item,
Okay,
sir.
let's go to public comment.
Public comment.
We were in report of the chief.
We're in the chief's
The
report.
chief's
We're
comments.
now on public comment, and I have 12 cards.
Okay.
With the large amount of city actions and community concerns about
Why don't
faulty
I-
bill
Sir?
reforms. And
Sir, I'll let you start over, but you want to identify
Can you
yourself,
identify
please?
yourself?
Oh,
for the
yeah.
record?
My name is Zachary Hughes. I recently sent a card with them back
Okay.
there.
Okay.
Okay. The large amount of city actions and community concerns about faulty bail reforms and ridiculous oppressive prison statistics. Hearing news of increase in police stops in African Americans and Los Angeles citizens is a disappointing display of the direction that the city is heading. We, with the limited amount of resources provided for the African American community, especially those who have been incarcerated, many of these people being pulled over can have their lives drastically changed by these in-car stops, stop and frisk situations. The police force needs to get rid of the toxic stigma that assumes criminality of the African American people. The troubles that's being caused by these in-car stop and frisk, with the amount of people being locked up and causing a consistent cycle for the community of African American people, it's a danger for everybody living in the communities. It reduces recidivism for returning to prisons is on a constant high, because let's face it, there's a lot of resources missing. There's LAUSD having their own issues. It's as if Los Angeles doesn't invest in the citizens of it. It doesn't invest in its own citizens, and it's causing several issues. The fact is that everybody here is angry about the Los Angeles Police Department not being able to be honest with its communities, and it being closed off from the people it's trying to protect. Honestly, it's caused a lot of harm.
Thank you, sir.
The next three speakers, please. The Red Chief Hunt, John Ramirez, and Jamie Garcia.
Hunt isn't here.
How you doing, Board of Police Commissioners? My name is John Ramirez. I was here several weeks ago. I'm actually for the Board of Police Commissioners' help on a case where my daughter was molested with two officers inside the house. I've known these officers for over 10 years during a relationship with my daughter's mother. She's grown up with these officers. And at the time of the raid of the house, I wound up getting into a fight with the officers and their family members and was fraudly sent to prison. During these times and years in prison, they made false accusations on me and sent my daughter to a protective witness program just so I wouldn't talk to her. And now I got more evidence in my hand to give you. I've came last time and you just sent me a letter saying that there was false accusations and they're not. And I'm also attending a police commissioner meeting in Torrance where I found out one of the officers and his family member were also going to court on accusations of molestation there too. So it's like I came here last time, I got no help from you guys, and I'm going through it again, being threatened in the streets not to show up in the court. And it's like the same repeated thing with these officers, and I have no help from you guys yet. You know, you tell me to talk to one of the officers outside these doors, and they just write down a few words, and that's all I hear from you. And I still see these officers. They are related to a few members of the streets that are coming after me once again. I moved 3 times last year just to keep away from them. And, you know, it's just the same repeated thing. You know, it's like I get no help. I'm being threatened by the officers also not to show up in court, which is coming soon. And, you know, there's no justice being done here for me. So I don't know what to do anymore, you know. I don't want to have to take matters into my own hands, protecting my own life against them. So, you know, it's just, I don't know what to say to you guys anymore. I got a paper and just no.
Sir, if I could briefly respond, I'm Mark Smith. I'm the Inspector General of the department. I believe our office had contact with you after the last time you spoke at this forum. But you mentioned just now that you had maybe additional evidence with regard to some of your claims. If that's the case, we'd be happy to sort of discuss that with you again and take that additional evidence. We have staff that's here today that can meet with you once more if you'd like.
Just did. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker, Jamie Garcia, followed by Hamid Khan and Adam Smith.
I don't think anything grounds me more than hearing the stories of what actually happens when the community interfaces with police. I've realized and I've come to conclusion that data is pretty much worthless. We cannot be decontextualized into charts, into graphs, into pies to make you understand what is happening. It is the stories that stops you. It is the stories that makes you lose your breath. It is the story that makes you remove your glasses and probably want to put your face in your hands. It is the stories that matter. And it's no surprise to me more to hear you say that the LA Times data is incomplete. It is no surprise that the commission ignored the Stop LAPD spying data that already stated what was being stated by LA Times. It's no surprise that you want to say this data, this data isn't valid. But at the same time, you are running predictive policing programs with incomplete data, with data that you've even said, your officers even stated, well, there is some type of bias in this data. But you continue to expand this program. You continue to allow these programs to run wild in the city that have this kind of impact. So it's funny when we want to claim when data is valid. It's valid in your hands when you want to police us, but when we actually say this is the impact and we give the data, you claim it's incomplete. It is so important that this commission allow us to present, to respond to this audit, and it is totally unacceptable, Soboroff, that you're not allowing us to do it because it's on your word that this is not being allowed. We must present. It's because of us that predictive policing programs are actually being audited.
You want to call the next speaker, please?
Our next speaker is Hamid Khan.
Next speaker, please. Thank you. Next speaker, please. No, I'm asking you a question. This is your last warning. Next speaker, please. So are you going to sit down, or am I going to have to ask you to leave?
You're just confirming that you're very afraid of the community, and you should be.
Thank you.
Because we have the truth on our side.
Next speaker, please.
So just picking up on my colleague Jamie Garcia, I just want to read a paragraph that why they don't want us to speak. Why they don't want us to speak. This is from our report before the bullet hits the body. That predictive policing is rooted in war and occupation. It is yet another tool, another practice built upon the long lineage, including slave patrols, lantern laws, Jim Crow, red squads, war on drugs, war on crime, war on gangs, war on terror, Operation Hammer, SWAT, aerial patrols, weed and seed, stop and frisk, gang injunctions, broken windows, and suspicious activity reporting. However, this time it's the veneer of science and technology, algorithms and data processing, hotspots, and math that give the stalker state the power, justification, and supposed right to predict, to pathologize, and to criminalize whole communities, and to trace, track, monitor, contain, and murder individuals. This is the trajectory before the bullet hits the body. That is the trajectory that we are exposing. Those are the programs that we are exposing. That is why Soboroff doesn't want to give us the 20 minutes to respond to the Inspector General audit. Not that we haven't done it before. Soboroff was here. Matt Johnson was the president of the commission. So the precedence is there. Eileen Decker, because you were also named as rejecting that request as well. So what happened to this thing? Why isn't the community allowed to? I mean, people who brought it to the attention of this commission, people who have been writing about it, people who have been organizing about it, what are you so scared of? What are you so scared of? You're now talking about and talking to more about building relationships, but why can't you just give 20 minutes as a response to when the audit comes out? Because we will fight it. We will continue to fight it, and we will take our time, or this fucking thing is going to be shut down.
The next speaker, Adam Smith, followed by Paula Miner, Reverend, and Steve Ducey.
I don't have much substance today. I just think it's like sickening. It's not just the things that you say and the things that you do, Steve. Like the quote in the LA Times article about being fine with the metro expansion and you are fine with it. Like that tells us everything we need to know about how you actually care about this community. So it's not just the things that you say, it's the way that you say them. It's the dismissive way that you deal with people of color, especially women. It's the way that you continue to criminalize protest in this room of black people, as we see with the case that's going on with Dr. Abdullah right now. It's just really shameful that Shane will sit next to you weekly, shake your hand, look up to you, apparently. Someone that, you know, is out there running a company that does good works, not a company that moves the graves of indigenous people to build Playa Vista like you. I don't understand how Shane can sit on this board next to you, but I guess that tells us a lot about her too. It's all just, it's disgusting. It seems so like minuscule, you know, and funny that you shout final warning at Jamie, who hadn't got a warning. What is your warning system? Is it a racialized warning system? I don't try to get kicked out of these meetings. No one tries to get kicked out of these meetings, but I've never been kicked out of these meetings. I've called you a fucking asshole from the seat. Because you are. You unfollowed me on Twitter, which was kind of disrespectful, but you've never...
Reverend, followed by Steve Ducey.
I think the real question I have today is, what did you call me?
Reverend.
Thank you. these officers somehow know my name. I didn't give any of these officers my name. My question is, how do they know my name? I'll wait. Isn't there a presumption of innocence?
Sir, I have no idea if they
These
termed you by.
officers know my name. Ask them.
Okay, well, I'm not going to ask them here, sir. How they know your name? They may know you because you've been here before. You've announced yourself before.
No,
I have
I
no
have
idea.
not.
But knowing your name, sir, is not improper. Any of the
My
knowing
question is,
any
how
more.
did they know my name?
You know my name, sir.
Oh, you the chief of police, you dumb shit.
So you're an important member of the community.
Your name's right there, you dumb shit.
You're an important member of the community.
The question is, how do they know my name? How do they know my name?
We hear you, Reverend. Go on.
Hey, fuck stick. How do they know my name? That's a legitimate citizen complaint. How the fuck do these bastards know my name? If she's calling me Reverend, how the fuck do these bastards know my name?
Yeah, we heard you, Reverend.
Police commission my ass. I'm waiting. That should be a violation of police policy, right? I'm fuckstick.
Next speaker.
Steve Ducey, please.
Madam Secretary, I think you skipped a speaker inadvertently. I thought you had called Paula Miner.
Paula Miner? Yes, I did call. No, I have
Is that
your.
by accident?
I did call your name. Paula Miner, please.
I just want to comment on Chief Moore talking about transparency. I think that they're just talking about how LAPD is trying to get around SB 1421, revealing records, how you will not allow the community to have a longer time to respond to the audit next week, goes against what you say about transparency. But I also want to talk about Soberoff's response to the LA Times report, because I didn't get to talk about that earlier. LA Times says that he believes in the mission of Metro and the expansion of Metro. I think we need to be aware that Metro is not the only division stopping black people in South Los Angeles. We need to be very clear on that. Metro is a distinct unit, but there still are other stops. Steve Soberoff says he needs more information before he can draw any conclusions. I think he should then be asking for more information, and that information should expand beyond Metro to talk about other racial profiling stops in the community. So I want to make sure that we ask Steve Soberoff to ask for more information, since he told the LA Times he doesn't have a comment till he gets more information.
Thank you.
Steve Ducey, followed by Lucas Martin.
Before I start, I want to point out 2 points of soft oppression that are happening in this room. The 13 officers that are surrounding us, what purpose do they serve? How are they protecting the community right now? They're basically just protecting you. I also want to point to the soft oppression of the 2 rows that are reserved for the officers and not for the public at a public meeting when there's no officers to sit in them. I also want to remind you of the quote that I brought before the winter break, the quote that I got from a young officer trainee at Days of Dialogue when he told me that the way we're grown as officers is military academy style. Break you down to build you up, breeding people without emotion. No amount of an 8-hour course in LGBTQ sensitivity or implicit bias training can erase that. These people are grown as military officers, and they see the world as a battlefield. And to take that away from them with implicit bias training is virtually impossible. I also want to point to the fact that your data-driven policing, which you try to talk about as somehow race neutral. Guess what? Those 5 times traffic stops for black people, now they all have points against chronic offender databases, and that's racist. And then to Chief Moore's points about the Olympics, I just want to point out that the International Olympic Committee demands a clean city for the games. What does that look like? You want to add 2,500 more officers for the Olympics. That's a 25% increase. What if we hired 2,500 more social workers for the people experiencing homelessness on our streets? And I also want to point out Alex Vitale, who's a professor of sociology at Brooklyn College and wrote a book called Abolishing Police. And yes, Ms. Goldsmith, the legacy of abolition started in the 1800s with the abolition of slavery, and it continues to this day with the abolition of police and prisons. And as much as you may try to dismiss that, there is significant scholarship on this subject, and this movement is powerful and it is growing. Since Mexico 68, we have seen local security forces use the Olympic Games as an excuse to dramatically increase riot control capabilities, body armor, surveillance technology. When the games end, the suppressive capacity doesn't evaporate. It remains part of the political policing capacity of the state. And we're looking at collaboration with ICE and Department of Homeland Security.
Do you have any other speakers?
Lucas Martin.
Mr. Martin? Next speaker, sir. Next speaker.
First warning. Gotta be black or brown to get a warning from overall. That's why you got a first warning.
Hi, my name is Lucas Martin. I'm a social worker, part-time grad student. I've been unemployed for the last 6 months, so I've been coming to these meetings. I've been here every week for the last 6 months. I've been able to learn a lot. I started coming here because I saw the way your officers treated homeless people on the streets of Skid Row. I saw it. It's real. Everything they're talking about is real. And I knew a man who died because your officers confiscated naloxone in a square block, so people died from heroin overdoses that night. It's against the law to confiscate naloxone, but it happened. That's not on you, that's on your predecessor, but still. But I'm here because of Steve Soboroff. I really think you should resign or be forced out, truly. After coming to these meetings for 6 months, seeing the way you treat the public, respect for people, integrity in all we say and we do, this is a rubber stamping commission. I think it could get better. It could get better, but it can't with your leadership. Commitment to leadership. All of you, you're responsible for this man who sits on your board, who's your president, who treats people the way he does, who naps through these meetings. I've seen him sleeping through these meetings, including last week. You need to have some responsibility. You need to have responsibility at the level of leadership so that it trickles down to the officers, so that they see that you take it seriously, that when someone disrespects people from your leadership, they don't lead anymore. That's all I have to say.
Melina Abdullah.
I think she left.
Jacqueline Richardson.
Oh, okay. She isn't. Oh, you're up. I'm sorry.
Oh, you thought I left even though
I thought I saw you walk. I saw you walk out the back door, but I didn't see you come
Next
back.
speaker,
in.
Melina
So you're up
Abdullah,
now.
please.
called Invisible Man. You should read it. Ralph Ellison, right, talks about that experience, how I could be invisible,
Okay,
but
you can
literally
start the clock,
first person. Right. Right. Or when he's conspiring to have me arrested and charged for speaking out on behalf of my people, then he sees me. Right. So I want to put up on my professor hat because my name is actually Dr. Melina Abdullah, and I teach Pan-African Studies, which is not just about implicit bias, but also about explicit racism. I want to point to the explicit racism that every single one of you have demonstrated, both in your questions and in your reporting today. You constantly make this kind of all lives argument. You talk about, when we're talking about Black people being stopped at 5 times our population share, you, Shane Goldsmith, who are supposed to be a progressive and supposed to have studied something about racial justice. You talk about making the city safe for all people. We are talking about the explicit, the specific experiences of black people. There is nothing wrong with saying black people. There is nothing wrong with talking about the specific experiences of black people, because that's what we're talking about. You also did that same thing, all people. We are talking about black people being stopped at 5 times our population share. So if you want to earn trust, maybe you should start by remembering that we're black. It's okay to say that we're black and that we have particular experiences at the hands of police who evolved out of slave catching. The second thing is you reduced our experiences to a matter of feelings. These are not feelings, these are experiences. And the data supports it, and our own testimonies support it. I think that what you're showing is, in fact, explicit racism, or if you prefer to call it implicit bias, maybe that's some examination that you need to do yourself. So we're going to keep saying that these are our experiences, these are our truths. We don't need an audit to validate it. We don't need a mayor's confirmation that an audit will be conducted. It's already underway.
Jacqueline Richardson, please. Jacqueline Richardson, followed by John Avalos Rios.
This is in regard to the CHP. It was on television within the last 3 weeks. They're having a problem. I don't know what city it's in or what county, but the television report stated that CHP in some county and city were having a problem with people getting on the freeway where it says "do not enter." I believe the people can't read English, because that's it happens between 12 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning, and they were very concerned. I don't think they're spreading it all over the place because they want to scare the general public. I only heard them repeat that once within the last 3 weeks. They get in the part that says exit only, and they go down there as fast as they can. I think they said within the last 6 months, they had 2 incidents of people running into people on that lane. I think it's a fast lane, I'm not sure. But it says exit only, and they enter that, and they go down that exit, and there have been problems, serious problems with that. I'm telling you just in case you're interested in that problem. My personal opinion is that these people do not speak English. Maybe they speak English, but they don't read English, so that makes a big difference. And I hope it doesn't happen in this part of town.
John Avalos Rios, and we have 2 late cards, Mr. President. That would be John Avalos Rios,
Hi.
Eugene, and Michael Williams.
Hi, everybody. When Melina the first time that she spoke, she mentioned her frustration with the chief talking about how he's listening to the community and listening to all these leaders, for input. But we can never accept that until you stop having these meetings here and you hold them regularly in the community in different areas, so that we know when those meetings are, so we, the organizers and the activists, can then let the students know and the educators know in the evenings they can come and talk to you. But when you have the meetings here and you don't want to change that, we've been hollering, huh, Gina? We've been hollering to you guys every week for 3 years. You got to hold these meetings, but you do hold them once in a while over at the Steve Soboroff field. To feed his ego, you'll have it over there maybe. So that's crazy that you all don't want to listen to that. It's crazy. I know I'm just totally powerless here. I'm just a low-income guy that lives in a garage. Who am I?
You're somebody.
And for you all not to do that and look, here these guys always switching their positions, and that is just not right. How do you want us to be nice to you guys if this is the atmosphere? Ugh. And then poor Waukesha Wilson's family had to come and endure this. And then they get dragged out. Melina gets dragged out. Who else has been dragged out of here? You're right. The white guys haven't. You all have. So I'm now the chairman of the committee to dismantle the police commission. That's my new position, right? The committee to dismantle. It's a sad idea. I know, it's a sad idea.
The next speaker, Eugene, please.
I won't this time. I'll try not to. Oh Lord. Yes, Sobrov. Sobrov, I'm talking to you. How are you, Sobrov? I'm here. You're supposed to be listening when we're speaking. I am a part of the community, and I just wanted to speak to you today to clarify something about last week. Last week, I think you took what I said as a direct threat by me. And I wanted to clarify that what I said yesterday was not a threat as much as it was a warning. Not from me. If you don't believe in God, you can call it karma. You can call it the universe, but there is karma, there is justice that will be served. Sobrov, I'm still talking, and I'd like some form of dignity or respect or just for you to be paying attention. There we go. Have you ever watched Dr. Scrooge or Scrooge? Not Dr. Scrooge, but Scrooge. You know, you are that character. You are the character. You're Scrooge McDuck. Yeah, that's right. You listen, Sobrov. You have the chance. Sobrov, come on. I'm trying to help you. For the love of God, I am trying to help you. Sobrov, you have the ability to change. You can change, but you have to understand that at this point, you are going to create a reputation for yourself that will ultimately be your own undoing. You cannot, again, rubber stamp the murder and the death of people, of innocent lives like you are continuing to do, because it seems like this entire board will not act unless you give them the green light. More. You can be the Ciprico of this whole thing. You can actually, rein in the corrupt cops. You can tell Sobrov what to do. You're supposed to have some leadership, some courage. Why don't you take the mantle? Because Sobrov has no backbone. Sobrov is a fucking coward, and Sobrov will not.
The next and final speaker on general public comment, Michael Williams.
Last warning. Next speaker, you're disrupting the meeting. You're disrupting the meeting. Are you going to sit down? Would you escort this gentleman out? You can take him out. He's out. You can escort him out. Sir, you can leave the meeting.
Fuck the police. That's right. Sobrov, you're a fucking coward. You honestly are a coward.
Go ahead and leave the meeting. Okay. Mr. Brown, sir, you're continuing to disrupt the meeting.
How many officers do we need in here?
You're supposed to be representing us. There are people that constantly come here and make stronger points and try to speak to you and try to reason with you, and you ignore them
If you don't stop disrupting the meeting, we're going to adjourn to closed session.
You don't even listen to these people.
So nobody else will be able to speak. We're going to now adjourn to closed session. We're going to move to adjourn to closed session. Go.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss items number 5A, 1, 2, and 3 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
Thanks for your patience. Okay. Okay. You prefer not to speak? That doesn't matter. Okay. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. In closed session, item number 5A1 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. In closed session, item number 5A2 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. And in closed session, item number 5A3 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted.
Motion for approval, motion for dismiss.
Motion to
Adjournment.
adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Gina Ray, and this is my dog Whippet. We're from Winnetka. Get it, girl. You're watching LA City View, Channel 35. This is our city and our channel.
Help! I'm built near an earthquake fault. Don't you know that one day the big one's going to hit and shake me to pieces?